Welcome to the Freedom to Learn podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Gentles. This season, we're diving into what it means to return education to states, communities, and families. And we're exploring what becomes possible when education is freed from union dominance and federal control.
When the federal government's involved, you lose autonomy, you lose control, right? Like there's no reason a family should have to pick up the phone and call a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. if they're upset with something happening in their local school. And so the more we can get the federal government out of that, the better.
Welcome back to Freedom to Learn. Matt Frendewey joins us today to talk about federal and state education policies that move power closer to students, including block grants, microschools, and education savings accounts, or ESAs. And we discuss what's driving the shift away from a lackluster K-12 system reform model to an exciting movement focused on freedom and choice for every student. Matt is Vice President of Strategy at Yes Every Kid, an organization that seeks to create educational opportunities free of arbitrary constraints. He has over 2 decades of experience in strategic communications, which includes working as a senior advisor to former U.S. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, and key roles at the American Federation for Children, Excel in Ed, and Michigan's Attorney General's Office. Matt Frendewey, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
Hey, thank you, Jenny. I appreciate it. Good to be here.
So what's your role in the K-12 edu world? What do you do?
What do I do? A good question. Maybe my colleagues shouldn't tune into this part. No, I work at Yes Every Kid. We're dedicated to unleashing the potential of every student in America. We believe that every kid has tremendous potential, and we want a system that serves them rather than a system that students are supposed to serve. And so I work on our strategy, on our comms, our marketing, research, kind of trying to tie all of our little pieces together at Yes Every Kid. And I try to spend a lot of my time thinking about where our movement is today and kind of where it wants to be or where it should be in 5-10 years from now.
When did you first get involved? I feel like I've known you for about a decade, but I would imagine that your involvement in education policy predates that.
Yeah, I mean, my first involvement was probably when I was a kid. My parents tried to start a school. It didn't work out. We went to a private school and then later public school. And I just remember actually as a child growing up outside Detroit, Detroit public schools were always kind of in kind of turmoil. That there was some sort of injustice here that I was able to go to this public school down the road, and 30 minutes down the road were these really terrible public schools. I would later work for the state attorney general for 8 years, where Detroit public schools would be taken over again by the state. At the same time, would be battling the governor at the time, Governor Granholm, over expanding charters and giving families more options. And I just saw this, like, there's this conflict here of the system's not working for a lot of families, and yet somehow the options that we're trying to make available for them somehow should be limited. And that led me to getting involved full-time in the movement. And I've been now working on education policy for better half of 15, 16 years.
Could you pull back the curtain on some of your behind the scenes work and share what you're working on now?
I feel like I've had a tremendous career, and I'm really blessed. I was able to work with American Federation for Children and Betsy DeVos when she was chair, and later Secretary of Ed, and later work alongside Governor Bush at Excel in Ed and Patricia Levesque. And then here at Yes Every Kid and our broader Stand Together community to work on expanding education freedom across the country. And kind of, I think what motivates me these days and what really excites me is we've really moved from this movement that was really focused on trying to reform the system, if you will, just to make it a little bit better, to really we've shifted to this point in time now where we're trying to free families. We're trying to create a movement of freedom. And to me, it's an important shift in terms of how we approach our work, but it's also an exciting shift because we see what families are doing out there that is completely different than what you may have imagined education could look like as much as 5-10 years ago.
So when you're talking about shifting from reforming to expanding freedom or focusing on freedom, what does that mean for the public school system that people have been trying to reform for all these many decades? What happens with that?
It means that the system as it's designed is going to do what it's intended to do, right? And I didn't make up that line. It's from this author, Donella Meadows, a professor from MIT. And she did this whole work on systems and how big systems change or why they don't change. And she discovered that most systems are designed to do what they're intended to do. Our system was built to provide a mediocre education to as many people as possible. And that was the intent, and that's what it's done. And for at least the last 30 years, we've tried really hard to make it a better system for all students. And we've seen reform after reform come up short. And we've seen frustrated parents, even frustrated educators. And to me, it's because the system's not intended to provide individual experiences and excellent individual experiences to students. And so all the reforms in the world will never get us to a system that's going to deliver on that. The only thing we can do to try and provide every student with an excellent education and individualized experience is think about how to transform into a model that really treats them as the customer. And to me, that's more than just school choice, right? It's about creating a model where families are truly empowered to be in control, where we trust them, where we don't just say we trust them, but we truly trust them. And then what does that mean? That means probably like elevating our risk tolerance as policies, public policy professionals, recognizing that parents are going to make decisions that we might not be comfortable with, or we may not make as parents or teachers. And stepping back and saying our role is no longer to try and control the outcomes of families, but to give families as many options as available and step back.
It's not a matter of funding. This is a matter of design. But we frequently hear, oh, if only we had more funding. If only we spent more at the federal level on Title I, then the low-income kids' outcomes would improve. If only we spent more on tutoring, then we could catch up on the learning loss caused by school closures during the COVID era. So how do you help people understand that it's not a matter of funding, it's a matter of design?
Well, I think two things. One, you just call the straw man out, right? I asked Randy Weingarten this on a radio interview where we debated topics almost 10 years ago. And I said she was going after the funding issue, school choices to fund public education. We need all the resources in public schools. And I said, Randy, how much? How much? How much money do you need? Because you keep saying you need more funding, but how much? And she couldn't answer. She tried to pivot. And that to me proved that this is just a talking point. And it's not to say that it doesn't cost money to fund education, right? Families who pay out of pocket know that it costs money. The point is that there's no dollar figure that will ever satisfy the opponents of education freedom. In terms of how to think differently about the funding argument is just go look at what's happening around this country. Go look at some of the low-cost education models that have sprouted up, that have been permissionless. They didn't wait for the government to come along and bless them. A family just got together, started to collaborate and built what we call now micro schools or pods. And they're oftentimes at low cost. And oftentimes they're serving lower income families. And they're all over the country. Vela Education Fund, helps provide some seed funding to over, I think, more around 4,000 of these now around the country, or nearly 4,000. And they're all of different sizes and shapes and forms. And none of them are sitting around waiting for the government to come bless them or waiting for the government to come fund them. They went and figured it out themselves, and they're serving thousands upon thousands of children all over this country. To me, that shows that the entrepreneurialism that really built this country, it can exist in education if we just step back and stop trying to control it.
I want to talk a little bit more about those models, those examples of success that you're seeing, but let's start at the highest level because this is getting a lot of attention and coverage. And I think there are a lot of questions right now. When we talk about education policy, unfortunately, the federal government comes up a lot, even though it has such a small role financially in what happens with K-12. It has nothing to do with these pods and micro schools. What do you think that the federal government's appropriate role should be?
That's a loaded question. I think it should be as minimal as possible, right? I recognize that there's some civil rights protections that are necessary to families that are enshrined in law. Other than that, and this isn't just me speaking, this is from research we've done, speaking both directly to families and focus groups, as well as polling. Families don't want a federal involvement in K-12 education. And in every capacity, we know that when the federal government's involved, you lose autonomy, you lose control, right? Like there's no reason a family should have to pick up the phone and call a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. if they're upset with something happening in their local school. And so the more we can get the federal government out of that, the better. I think that's why I'm excited with Secretary McMahon. She's, I think, really cast a bold vision about trying to return as much power to the states. And I think that starts with eliminating, any type of top-down mandates, trying to block grant funds, and really just saying, look, states know best. That's what was intended. That's what federalism is all about. Trust states to manage their local schools. And then from there, really trust families, right? Give families as much autonomy and freedom as possible. And so my preference would be the most minimalist role possible if there were a role at all for the federal government. I can't point to an example of really, other than maybe some extreme civil rights examples of where the federal government's really gotten involved and made things better. But I can point to a whole lot of examples and a whole lot of frustration from parents and teachers where the federal government has made life more difficult.
So, as far as solutions, implementing returning education to the states, I heard you throw out the term block grants. And sometimes in Washington, D.C., in think tank circles, we kind of throw around terms. We unfortunately throw around a lot of acronyms, and then we don't explain what we mean. Could you explain what you mean when you say block grants?
So the notion is right now, right, let's take Title I funding, right? That's the largest K-12 block of funds.
And it's designed to support students who are struggling, who
Yep.
might be from low-income households.
Absolutely. And so to simplify it, right, you have a low-income kid, they trigger, a stat that goes up to their local education association authority. That triggers a stat that goes up to the state education authority. That gets reported up to the feds. You would think then dollars come right down to the state, to the locals, and to that school. And that's not how it works. Instead, what happens is a really complicated formula that I like to joke that only 3 people know that how it works, and all 3 are
probably right.
And it creates a formula that ends up funding the states, and the states get the ability to kind of address how the funding reaches the local education authority, and the local education authority gets to determine how that fund's distributed to the schools. And what has been demonstrated time and time again, this is not just recent, it's not just a Trump era issue, this was not just a Biden era issue or Trump one, like going back to the Obama administration and the Bush administration, like there are report after report that the funds do not reach the kids. Like the low income kids who trigger Title I, who are, I would argue, entitled to it because that's what the law was intended to support, don't get the funds. A USA News and World Report article from, I think, 2015 now, maybe 2014, covered this in Virginia and showed that wealthier districts in Virginia figured out how to kind of manipulate the formula to get more funding where lower income districts didn't. And so to me, let me go back to my whole point. The federal government's not designed to administer these funds well. And so what I would rather do is, to use Virginia, for example, is what is the number of the dollar figure for all Virginia for Title I, block grant those funds to Governor Youngkin and make him responsible for distributing them. Because if the citizens are upset, if they don't feel like they're getting the resources, they can actually take political retribution out on Governor Youngkin, right? Or Governor Newsom or Governor Whitmer, fill in the blank in the state. They can actually hold them responsible as opposed to a nameless bureaucrat who says, oh, it's part of a formula. So that's a very simplified, and I'm sure I'm going to get some emails from some of my friends who are like, you really oversimplified block grants. But that is a very simplified explanation of how block grants could be used to better fund states as opposed to the Title I formula that currently exists.
And a reminder to listeners that Title I's been around since 1965. So We're talking 15 years before the creation of the U.S. Department of Education. This is something that was part of the Great Society, the push back in the mid-60s, and the creation of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which has had different names as it's been reauthorized over the years. Was NCLB, now it's ESSA. I've heard you talk about this before, that shifting the power from the federal to the state, to the local level, it shifts the accountability mechanism closer to the students, closer to voters, closer to parents.
We've talked to parents about accountability. We've asked them, like, what is accountability? And just absent education, we just ask them, what does accountability mean to you? How do you hold your kid accountable? What does accountability look like? And time and again, parents will say accountability is typically a consequence, positive or negative, of an agreed upon outcome that was expected, that between their kid perhaps or an employee at work, right? I expected you to get home before your curfew, and if you did, positive consequence, your curfew continues, or maybe it grows. Negative consequences, maybe your curfew comes down, right? We have accountability everywhere. Only in education do we have accountability where it's not accountable to the family. Accountability is this test largely that is administered around the country through states. And we call that in education accountability. And we did that largely because there was no option for families to hold their schools accountable. They weren't able to fire them, if you will, or hire them. It was, you went to your public school, and so we're going to outsource your accountability to this state test. And then this state test will somehow exert some sort of consequence on the schools. In the 30 years that we've been doing this, it hasn't worked, right? Schools haven't gotten tremendously better. If anything, according to NAEP, they're doing worse and continuing, and at best, flatlined. Accountability to me is the genesis and really the backbone behind education freedom. Like, it's the ability for a family to say, I'm not happy with you, traditional public school, or even a private school or a micro school, whoever it is. You're fired. You don't get my kid next year. I'm going somewhere else. That's accountability. And that's accountability that I think we've never had in education before, and we're starting to have now. And to me, that creates healthier outcomes, right? It causes a school, regardless of the sector, to be like, hey, I want to serve you better. I want to meet your needs. I want to understand what you want. When we talk to families who switch between public school to any other model, a lot of them described like being pushed out of their public school. Basically, that they weren't happy, and they raised the concerns to the public school on multiple different occasions, whether it was academics or bullying or cultural issues, and that the school largely ignored them or downplayed their concerns, or essentially just didn't address them. And in almost every situation, the parent ended up, if you will, firing that public school and going to a new school. And that new school creates a level of accountability. They've held somebody else accountable, executed a consequence, and hired somebody to meet their needs. That, to me, creates way better outcomes than what we've oftentimes tried to call accountability, which is a test. And I think that's, if we're really honest with ourselves as education policy folks, that's what I think causes families to be most frustrated about state testing, is they'll take a test, their kid will take a test, it'll disrupt their whole learning. They won't get the results back till like August. And, usually
if August.
And it's usually like a day or two before they start the next school year. And it's because the test was never designed for them. It was never actually designed to give the family accountability. It was never actually designed to give the family the ability to hold the system accountable. Instead, it was really designed for some faraway bureaucrat to try and measure how well a school might or might not be doing. And for good reason, families have felt frustrated because they've been told, this is your form of accountability, but they actually get no consequence out of it.
Right. So you're talking about the testing and the taking up issues with the school. I watched my local school district's school board meeting a couple weeks ago, and there were several dozen members of the public who went up during the public comment, said their 2 minutes, and then the school board chair said, thank you for your comments, went on to the next one. And then they proceeded to move forward with the policy exactly as they had already intended to do, and attributed the decisions that they made in that policy area to the people who spoke who already agreed with them. There was no accountability to the members of the community who are expressing a totally different perspective, and therefore those members of the community, because this is a very serious policy issue, are already sending their children to alternatives to the public school or are exploring those because the public school is not meeting their needs and is not keeping their children safe in their minds. Yeah. So this reframing of the way we think about accountability is important. You mentioned that you've worked with American Federation for Children, Excel in Ed, now with Yes Every Kid. These are all organizations that engage in a very intentional and focused way at the state level to make sure that state legislators understand what good education policy looks like, what bringing power closer to the people closest to the students looks like. Can you give examples in your work, whether it's really recently or over the years, of states doing the right thing in these policies that we're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, there's like 13 states passed new education freedom laws this year, right? Like I'll
And
use
I
that
thought
as
it was going to be a slow year.
I thought so too, but it was a great year. But standout states, right? Like there's no reason we shouldn't be celebrating Texas, but we'll see how, implementation is always where these laws come into play. Let's use Arizona, right? As an example. It was the state that passed the first ESA program, originally just for special needs families, and then families who lived on reservations, and it expanded to military families, et cetera. And now it's fully universal. It unfortunately was not the first universal. They like to, West Virginia likes to remind them, but they're doing a really good job, I think, of recognizing that we need to trust families and allow families to be free. And what I mean by that is, originally they were trying to approve every expense a family made, and they realized really quickly they couldn't do this. There's so many families trying to exercise new education freedom that the state finally said anything under $2,000 we're going to approve, and then we're going to do risk-based auditing, which is essentially how the rest of the world works, right? But to me, it reinforces the notion that we need to trust families, let them do what they believe is right for their kid, and then weed out the bad actors. There's always going to be some bad actors. Like, I like to remind folks, if you really want to focus on bad actors in education, like there's $1 billion public school system down the road from you somewhere that is guaranteed they're fleecing funds, and they budget for like X number of extra monitors every time they buy monitors because somehow they all 30% of them or whatever disappear or are broken. So if you're really concerned about public education funds being misspent, I promise you there's a public school district down the road that would love your help weeding out that fraud. In Arizona, it's less than 1% of families have been identified as spending fraud, but they get scrutinized way more. I mean, there's been a holy war against the program lately from the mainstream media there, trying to identify one or two expenses here or there. The overall majority, like 99% of families, are using their funds appropriately to educate their kids, to buy things that give them, the tools and knowledge and skills to learn, core academics, as well as experience education in a way more dynamic way than the traditional, 4 rooms with a chalkboard or 4 walls and a chalkboard.
Yeah, so we've got the states that have moved to the universal model, like Arizona, like Florida. Let's make
Florida,
sure.
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm not going to not mention Florida, or else I'll get calls from our friends in Florida. Florida's another great state. I mean, 400,000 plus students now involved in the Florida education freedom movement. It's tremendous. I think Florida's exciting, but I can't stop there. Right, Arkansas, Iowa. Like I said, I'm excited to see where Texas goes. Louisiana now, West Virginia obviously is fully universal. We have a lot of excitement out there. And what's really cool, if you ask my opinion, is that all those programs I just mentioned, where it might be a little complicated for some of our friends that we work with in the federal government, but they're all different. Like each one of those has their own unique twist, their own unique, flavor, their own unique, state design. And that to me is a good thing, right? Like that shows that, public policy done at the state level is better because it allows states to really design what they think is best for their citizens.
Yeah, the unique design and then the opportunity to evolve over time. Like as you mentioned, Arizona started serving a narrow population of students and then expanded over time.
The caution I'd have with those approaches is that you risk the transition trap that Arizona had, right? Arizona's original idea was like, we can just slowly grow this program and expand it. And it was really difficult. And they had just as much, um, pain expanding it just a little bit as much as they had when they went fully universal. So what I would encourage any policymakers or lawmakers listening is like, it's better to just go and serve all your constituents first. Cause for no other reason, you're going to have bigger buy-in, right? Like, and to me, that's part of the beauty of this universal movement that we've kind of evolved into post-COVID, is that it's kind of an accepted notion that not only does everyone largely support this now, I mean, you look at the polling, regardless of it, whether it's from Gallup, AFC, or the polling we've released, it's, Republican, Democrat, independents are all well over 55, 60% in support of education freedom. And so it's like, give this to as many folks as possible, then let families decide who's going to opt in. And I think if you're, the opposition, you, for good reason, probably are fearful that everyone's going to opt in tomorrow. To me, that probably speaks to how poorly the product might be that you're trying to defend. But what really happens is, as you know, families opt in on their terms, right? They decide, hey, like, this isn't working for me anymore, or I'm really excited for something new, or maybe I want a blended experience. I want my kid to still go to the traditional public school for a little bit, and I'm excited to see if I can blend that with some alternative options, or vice versa. And to me, like, that's the kind of future of education, where sectors can't kind of hold a kid hostage, and kids can kind of pick and choose what is best for them.
Could you talk a little bit more about what that looks like? I know you guys talk about like the early adopters. So what are the early adopters doing and exploring and are excited about with this?
So, I think like high school is ripe for disruption, right? I think we were talking about this, like, it's a really, it was glamorized, and it still glamorizes this really cool, fun experience for kids, and this coming of age, and, whether you watch, the movie that might come out this summer or several years ago, it's always this kind of exciting moment in kids' lives. For a lot of kids, though, now it's like racked with like stress and anxiety, and trying to, cram in all the AP classes and the volunteer work, and trying to make sure that you don't miss anything, so you prepare yourself perfectly to get your perfect college application ready. And it's just, to me, it's like this like awful amount of stress we're putting on kids when we're trying to like really help them grow into adults. And we wonder why there's such like burnout and frustration with children these days. What I think is exciting, and I think I mentioned this once before, is you're starting to see this unbundling of education, right? In Arizona, for example, there's several districts that are publishing rate sheets of like how you could buy one course with your ESA. And they're starting to go like, look, maybe your micro school doesn't teach X topic, maybe AP, math or something, or maybe it's a language. You can come buy it from us for this amount. You can use your ESA to come over here and purchase from it.
I've heard about Florida districts doing that too.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, Florida's starting to do it, and we see it in Utah as well. To me, like, that's an exciting opportunity for families to start to say, hey, how can I curate this experience for my kid to really let them like flourish, like explore who they are, what they're interested in, and then, maybe it's a micro school for a few hours, maybe it's a public school for a few more hours, and maybe it's even a private school or a charter school for 1 or 2 days, and then maybe it's an internship or other things that are more conventionally blended into education for kids later in their their schooling career. I think that's exciting. I think it's really just stepping back and like recognizing that, especially, and we're starting to see this with higher ed, right? There's been this challenge among a lot of families with higher ed, like, hey, we were sold this idea that college not is just for everyone, but it must be for everyone. And you get a lot of families, or I shouldn't say families, but a lot of individual kids now who graduate high school, go on to college, graduate college, and realize that like they're just kind of like on this assembly line, and they're not happy with what they ended up doing. And I think the more we can lower the pressure on, like, college should be like an option for most everyone, but it doesn't have to be. And Mike Rowe talks a lot about this with Mike Rowe Works. around like alternative, education pathways, and the idea that like there's a lot of kids out there who like to work with their hands and could immediately find themselves in a career that is fulfilling and provides them a lifelong pathway to success and fulfillment that's not through college, that's through a untraditional, accreditation or tech school. And I think it's important for us to raise and elevate those alongside college as opposed to calling them these like alternatives. So I think there's a lot of excitement out there. I feel like we're like reaching this like boiling point where families and even maybe high school students themselves are going to be like, enough. This is broken. We need to do something different. And so I'm really excited to see what that looks like. I don't know the answer, but I know it's something that we are thinking a lot about here at Yes and at our sister organization Stand Together.
Yeah, well, we'll be keeping an eye on it as well. And I personally will be, as I have 2 high school students in my home.
Absolutely. So tell us what you learned, because we'd be interested to know how you're navigating it as a education expert.
Right, Matt. I like to dispel myths. I think you do too. Is there an education freedom myth or another topic that we've been tossing around today that really bugs you and that you'd like to dispel?
Let's see. Myth. Yes. I'll tackle 2. I'll go back to accountability. I would say that we have a myth is that we offer. Well, I inadvertently, without even realizing, almost stole Mike McShane's title of a paper he wrote, The Accountability Myth. I won't steal it from him, but I almost stumbled into it. Like I would offer, and he writes in this paper, The Accountability Myth, that accountability is a contested term, right? And I think, and this is from 2021, I believe, when he wrote this paper. I think it's really coming into fruition now, where families are recognizing that they don't really get the accountability they were promised. They don't get it through the school board. They don't get it through the traditional public school or through a state standardized test, and they get it through exercising choice. They get it through exercising some sort of decision over where they want to send their kid. So I'm excited to see how that hopefully reframes what accountability means to families. And I think it gives us an opportunity as policy experts to be honest with families that, like, look, this test that you want your kid to take, because most families want to know how their kid's doing. Most teachers are administering tests regularly to assess their students' progress. Those are important metrics to help you as a parent understand how your child's doing. But true accountability is your ability to make sure that you can pick and choose the education environment for your child. I think the other myth would be that education freedom and microschooling, for example, are these sort of like flash in the pan things that were just coming out of COVID, right? Oh, school choice is taking off because of COVID. All these micro schools and education entrepreneurs that are popping up, it's just a result of COVID. Mm-hmm. And I would say it may have poured fuel on the educational freedom fire, but it's certainly not a flash in the pan. Education entrepreneurs are just springing up left and right. If you don't know of a micro school right now, I can almost promise any of your viewers that or listeners that within 10 miles or less of you, there's a micro school. Like it's wild. And one of the best stories I have of this, I work in this space, and I was in my little community Facebook group. Somebody said, "Hey, I'm looking to change my kid's school," and everyone talked about different private schools or public schools nearby. And then one parent said, "Hey, I lead a micro school. It's a homeschooling co-op." And it was literally like 3 blocks over from me in the neighborhood. And I'm in this space and I don't even know it exists. Like, they're all over the place. They're a little hidden at times. I think that's a little bit of their charm too, that there's these like really beautiful little micro schools all over the country. And so I think the idea that these are just a flash in the pan is false. And the idea that this movement that started as a kind of a rescue movement to rescue the least among us has shifted into this freedom movement to give every student in this country the opportunity to go to the school or the learning environment that best suits them.
Matt, so appreciative of all that you've done to make that happen. How can people follow your work?
Visit us at yeseverykid.com. You can follow me on X at Matt Frendewey. Love to engage with folks, positive or negatively.
Well, Matt Frendewey, thank you for your commitment to education freedom, and thank you for joining Freedom to Learn.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Jenny.
Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Learn more about our work at dfipolicy.org. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send feedback, questions, and episode ideas to podcast@dfipolicy.org. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow and review Freedom to Learn on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend.